Welcome, everyone. It's our pleasure today to welcome back Dr. Peter McCullough. Dr. McCullough is an internist, cardiologist, epidemiologist, chief scientific officer for the Wellness Company. He is recently quoted as having said, where there's a slew of corruption, you will find the biopharmaceutical complex setting up shop. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the biopharmaceutical complex, which is something I would have doubted existed. I really would have pushed back on it had the last 2 years not happened. He has a book, The Courage to Face COVID-19, Preventing Hospitalization and Death While Battling the Biopharmaceutical Complex. You can follow Peter McCullough at petermcculloughmd.com. McCullough is McCullough. And, he's always very interesting, and I learn a little something by talking to him. Of course, our friend Dr. Kelly Victory is here to interview him and share some ideas as well. So let's get right to it.
Our laws as it pertains to substances are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
I recently discovered Paleo Valley. They have a line of products that align perfectly with a paleo dietary regimen. Goodbye to the limited rotation of eggs, burgers, and the standard fare. Hello to a wide variety of extraordinary products that are both healthful and delicious. Paleo Valley offers a spectacular range of options, including 100% grass-fed beef sticks. They're packed with nutrients like omega-3 fatty acids, vitamins, minerals, glutathione, CLA, and bioavailable protein. Plus, keto-friendly, make for a great protein-rich snack on the go. Paleo Valley's tasty beef sticks are not just 100% grass-fed, but also grass-finished, sourced from small domestic farms in the U.S. and flavored with real organic spices. They're also fermented, which means they contain natural probiotics that are great for gut health, and they taste amazing. Try them out by heading over to paleovalley.com/Dr. Drew to get 15% off your first order today. Don't miss out on this opportunity to discover a brand that is perfect for your paleo lifestyle. We appreciate all your patience with us being a few minutes late. We had to give Dr. McCullough a chance to set up in his new studio. And yesterday we had some other issues, but we appreciate your leniency with us and flexibility, so we appreciate it very much. And I'm reading a quote on our restream here from Liberty Ninja. Susan is the smart one with all this craziness. Dr. Drew is coming along slowly. So Susan, I thought I would let you ring in here first as we launch into this conversation with Dr. McCullough.
Okay. What do you want me to say?
Just how excited you were to talk to him again, hear from him again.
Oh, I'm really excited to talk to him again.
Yeah.
And he was one of the original people that we spoke to at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And probably one of the first people that got us a strike on YouTube. And fortunately, we're still around. We made it.
Okay.
But I'm really happy to have him back.
And you're also helping about this new Paleo Valley.
Yes,
sponsor.
and we have a new sponsor, and we're so excited. Paleovalley.com. You can also go to drdrew.com/paleovalley because if you do paleovalley.com/Drew, you're going to get another organization.
The wrong one.
But Drew loves the beef sticks. He's able
God.
to eat them. He travels with them. He show him, yeah. And also we like the bone broth, and you'll hear more about that later.
Fair enough. Let's bring in cardiologist, internist, epidemiologist, chief scientific officer for the Wellness Company, Dr. Peter McCullough. Dr. McCullough, thank you as always for joining us. I feel like I first need kind of an update from you, like what's been happening lately. What are your thoughts? Where have you been? How have things evolved from your perspective?
I'll tell you, I have to apologize for the YouTube strike. No one should take a YouTube strike when we have a novel virus and we're trying to discuss treatment approaches. That's what people wanted to hear. If they're sick, how could they be treated? Things were so dramatic over the course of the first year. I basically teamed up with John Leake, who's already a true crime best-selling author, and we wrote the book, Courage to Face COVID-19. And it's all about what happened very early on in terms of our abilities to try to find ways of helping people avoid hospitalization and death. That's what we were doing. And really the big reveal in the book is, instead of being congratulated or actually getting assistance, getting some wins in our sale, instead we were crushed. We were crushed with social media, censorship. There was a tremendous wave of antipathy that came forward to anybody who was trying to bring help to America and the world.
I mean, just thinking back to the fact that there wasn't routine application of corticosteroids, or we weren't discussing optimum dosing and which corticosteroid. These clearly had benefit. I took them when I had an alpha outbreak, and even that wasn't allowed to be discussed because, God forbid, you might wander into one of the forbidden words. So weird.
It's interesting. In May of 2020, the very first Senate hearing, with Ron Johnson, who was leading these, had Pierre Corey on. And Pierre Corey was brought on to discuss steroids. Do you know at that time, every single agency, the NIH, CDC, FDA, Infectious Disease Society of America, the EMA, they all said, do not use corticosteroids to treat COVID-19. That's in May of 2020. Yeah. Corey went on, he said he reviewed the data, and he said, I'm treating patients, we should use steroids. Now, within a few months, the entire world followed Corey. But look how wrong the agencies were. In writing, they were completely wrong. And the issue is, it was early on. We don't want to, throw any stones, but the societies could have been neutral on things and said, we're neutral right now. We're not sure if the doctor's judgment. There's no problem or risk with neutrality. What we didn't like to see is these authoritative statements on essentially what I call therapeutic nihilism, not to do things when people are dying.
Yeah. Crazy. Now we're in a situation where we have a second bivalent booster. And so, I have a mixed sort of opinion about vaccines. My elderly patients, I've been vaccinating and boosting them, and I had most of them take the bivalent vaccine. But now we have a second bivalent, a second booster. While, by the way, here in Southern California, a new variant has been circulating around, a new variant that is not covered by this bivalent booster. And we have no data on this booster, none whatsoever. And I've been saying I'm going to kind of hold here, even for the elderly patients. Today was the first day that on several occasions, patients asked me about it. I guess somebody sent out some sort of an announcement. It was LA County public health, or maybe may have been Pfizer, or who knows who sent it out. But they all got a notification because they all came in telling me, should I get this second booster? And I said, look, I don't have enough. You can take it if you want, but I can't recommend it because I don't have any data. I can't yet. And this has been the problem all the way through the pandemic. The practitioner cannot make a risk-reward analysis, and yet recommendations and mandates were coming down on their patients constantly.
It's true. And there's no excuse not to do large randomized trials. Remember, all the vaccines from the very beginning, it was understood they only last 6 months. They actually fade after a few months. So everybody's essentially unvaccinated in a few months anyway. Why couldn't we have had large-scale randomized trials? People could have participated in them. Each company, Pfizer, Moderna, they had $100 billion of revenue. There was, plenty of money to go around to fund large clinical trials. We should not have been guessing. What happened was, in the spring of 2022, there was an attempt of actually having a vaccine against the BA1 subvariant Omicron, and quickly the virus mutated. The companies gave up on that. Then we got around to the summer and fall of 2022. Actually, August 16th is when they came out, was the BA4, BA5 subvariant vaccines. Now, these were boosters. They still had 50% of the original formula against the wild type strain, and then the BA4, BA5 Omicron strain. Moderna was actually reduced in dose from 100 to 50. Pfizer stayed the same at the same cumulative dose, composite dose of 30 micrograms. Remember, Janssen never changed, and Novavax never changed. But the boosters, the novel boosters, only applied to messenger RNA. And there, they were approved with no human data. There was simply animal data, and they relied on antibodies. This is very important. And remember, the diagnostic division of the FDA says, do not rely on antibodies because they're not a reliable surrogate of immunity. That's the FDA diagnostic division. The FDA vaccine group actually relied now 8 times on EUA authorizations on what's called immunobridging studies. They're relying on antibody. In this case, they relied on mice model antibody elevations. The mice actually got sick with Omicron anyway, so it didn't stop the clinical infection. And that's how the new boosters came out.
Yeah, this has been this lack of data. A friend of mine is we're going to get on the show. We've had him on before, Dr. Yogendra, who is working on long COVID. $5 billion was allocated for long COVID, and no one knows where that money went. He's going to be doing some really serious science on all this, but nobody else is, and yet billions of dollars were allocated for it. What has happened to us? The weird lack of doing science, and then the weird adulteration of what gets published. These are my two great concerns right now. Am I biased in some way? Is there something I'm seeing that I'm not seeing, or what's going on here?
An interesting paper. It's on my Substack. It has to do with retracted papers. We've had papers that are fully published, copyrighted, contracted, indexed in the National Library of Medicine. They've fully gone through peer review, editor review, finally editorial decision. They're actually out in the public domain for weeks or months, and then the journals retract them for administrative reasons. And it turns out these papers are far more cited than papers that don't get retracted. And this is what we call censorship. It's at the level what we believe is a biopharmaceutical complex, a powerful syndicate that's formed that will basically comb through the literature. Anything that's threatening to an official narrative, the editors and the publishers actually get pressure to retract them. So even the medical community now is seeing things through a biased lens.
And would it be accurate to say that even some of the things that have been legitimately retracted because they were, either bad studies or completely fallacious, sometimes those still get quoted?
Well, it's possible, but what we're finding out is the ones that are actually valid studies that were withdrawn for administrative reasons, those are the ones that are heavily cited. So they're actually bringing truth, and people are citing them anyway because they're important papers. Almost everything now is published in the preprint server anyway, so we always have the ability to go back and cite them. We're just trying to advance the science here. There's about 10,000 retractions a year, about 7 million publications, so it does happen. There can be overt fraud. It's very rare. I was the editor of 2 major journals for decades, and I can tell you it comes up very rarely. But what we're seeing breach of publication contract and retraction of valid papers because we believe of this external influence on publishers and editors.
Are you thinking of any papers in particular?
Yeah, the paper in particular that I was involved in was fully published. I was the senior author in the Current Problems of Cardiology. This was an invited paper. It went through peer review. It dealt with myocarditis, and it was basically breaking the data down on epidemiology of myocarditis that we saw emerging after the messenger RNA products. And it was fully published 6 days before the pediatric FDA vaccine meetings. We get a notice from Elsevier, the publisher, that it's being retracted. And we specifically asked, well, is there invalidity here? Is there some type of sign? No, scientifically it's fine. They're retracting it for administrative reasons. And they asked us to voluntarily agree to it being retracted. I disagreed. I'd already paid thousands of dollars of publication fees. Manuscripts take so much effort to get across the finish line. And so they ended up posting this and saying, listen, this was reviewed at the editor's or the author's request, meaning obviously they decided to do it. So, I've had to threaten a lawsuit, and it's just, it's a travesty to see valid papers withdrawn when we know they're important contributions, and particularly suspicious timing right before a pediatric vaccine meeting, and it deals with myocarditis.
Interesting. Well, I know Kelly is very interested to get in this conversation, so I want to bring her in here as early as possible. I also want to tell people, I believe we have Ed Dowd coming in on Monday. Is that correct, Susan? At 3
Yes,
o'clock.
correct.
He has some important data he wants to update, and so we'll give him a chance to do that. Nicole Sapphire is coming in here. We got a lot of good guests coming in, but of course, today it is none other than Dr. Peter McCullough, which we will bring back in just after this, and bring in Dr. Kelly as well. With Mother's Day quickly approaching, what better way to express your love than by giving the gift of younger-looking, beautiful skin with the luxurious feel of Genucel skincare? Susan, who is a huge fan of the brand, has raved about their Ultra Retinol product, which contains powerful retinol alternative, bakuchiol, and a proprietary MDL technology to soothe irritation and target red blotchy skin. Additionally, their under-eye treatment is perfect for hiding those pesky bags and puffiness that can result from long flights or lack of sleep.
I know I'm a snob about the products I use on my face. Everybody knows it. Every time I go to the dermatologist's office, they're just rows and rows of different creams. Retinols, vitamin C cream, under-eye cream, night creams.
Scrubs.
And then when I get to the counter, they're overpriced. All kinds of products that you can all find at Genucel.com.
In fact, you might have witnessed the astonishing effects of Genucel Redness Repair Intensive during a recent unplanned moment of our show. Repairing my skin within minutes right before your eyes. That's just how fast this stuff works. Celebrate the special mom in your life today by visiting Genucel.com/Drew and check out the personalized packages from Susan and from myself, bundled with our favorite Genucel products. And remember to use the promo code DREW for an extra 10% off. All orders are upgraded to free shipping. Plus, if you order now, every package purchased gets a free spring spa package with 3 of Genucel's best-selling spa products ready to try in the comfort of your own home. Woo! Again, that's Genucel.com/Drew, GENUCEL.com/DREW. Over the last few months, no doubt you've heard a lot about spike protein, certainly on this program. The reality is, once lockdowns are well behind us, we will likely still be dealing with the effects of COVID and potentially the COVID-19 vaccines. Therefore, the spike protein may prove to be an important part of our story. With that in mind, I want to introduce you to the Wellness Company's Spike Support Formula. Whether you've been vaccinated or not, spike protein may be something you have become concerned about. Good news is that there's some interesting research on how to potentially deal with it. Studies have suggested that nattokinase and dandelion root are showing some potential in protecting you and your family. Our friend Dr. Peter McCullough and the team at the Wellness Company have the only product on the market that contains both nattokinase and dandelion root. In addition to the nattokinase and the dandelion root, the Wellness Company's Spike Support Formula also includes natural antioxidant ingredients such as black sativa extract, green tea, and Irish sea moss, all thought to help boost immune health. Go to twc.health/Drew to order today. Use code DREW at checkout for 10% off today. President Trump recently issued a warning from his Mar-a-Lago home. Quote, "Our currency is crashing and will soon no longer be the world standard, which will be our greatest defeat, frankly, in 200 years. There are 3 reasons the central banks are dumping the U.S. dollar: inflation, deficit spending, and our insurmountable national debt. The fact is, there is one asset that has withstood famine, wars, political and economic upheaval dating back to biblical times: gold. And you can own it in a tax shelter retirement account with the help of Birch Gold. That's right, Birch Gold will help you convert an existing IRA or 401k, maybe from a previous employer, into an IRA in gold. And the best part, you don't pay a penny out of pocket. Just visit birchgold.com/Drew for your free info kit. They'll hold your hand through the entire process. Think about this. When currencies fail, gold is a safe haven. How much more time does the dollar have? Birch Gold has an A+ rating with Better Business Bureau and thousands of happy customers. I do not give financial advice, and previous performance is no guarantee of future performance. Visit birchgold.com/Drew to get your free info kit on gold. That is birchgold.com/DREW. Some platforms have banned the discussion of controversial topics. If this episode ends here, the rest of the show is available at drdrew.tv.
There's nothing in medicine that doesn't boil down to a risk-benefit calculation. It is the mandate, public health, to consider the impact of any particular mitigation scheme on the entire population. This is uncharted territory, Drew.
Dr. Kelly Victory, welcome back. Dr. Peter McCullough.
Hey, Dr. McCullough, thanks so much for joining us. I know how crazy busy your schedule is, so appreciate you you making time for us. Before I'm going to pick up on, there's so many things I want to ask you about, but I think it's fair to say you and I have both suffered the slings and arrows from the beginning of this thing. We were both really on the forefront of this. And we suffered everything from, cancellation to character assassination, of course, pointing out things like the inefficacy of masks, the dangers of the lockdowns, the idiocy of school closures, And now fast forward to the overwhelming and irrefutable evidence of severe harms from these vaccines. And unfortunately, although it would be certainly, I can understand the desire perhaps to do an "I told you so" victory lap, because you and I have been proven now to be right. Even Anthony Fauci would acknowledge that we were right about the vast majority of this. I've said there's really no time for that. There are too many people suffering severe injuries from these vaccines in particular, as well as all the other things I mentioned. And it is incumbent upon us, I believe, to really rally all hands on deck. How can we help these people? So I want to start with that positive thing, which is the nattokinase. You just posted today a Substack talking specifically about nattokinase. I've talked about it on this show before, but let's start with that. Start with how, here's something that we can do. You were obviously probably the premier person talking about what can we do to treat COVID. Now it's what can we do to help people now? So start, if you would, with talking about nattokinase, how you got to that and where you see its application.
Sure. Most people understand now that in about 3,000 peer-reviewed papers on vaccine injury syndromes, fatal and non-fatal, what's really causing the problem is the spike protein, which is the spine on the surface of the virus. And most people now have had both the viral infection and the vaccines. So we can't separate them. They've actually had COVID and they've had the vaccines. In the United States, we know 75% of Americans have taken a vaccine. So they've been loaded with the spike protein. They didn't get much protection. They wear out after about 6 months, but they actually have the spike protein, which lasts in the body, we believe, for a very long time, many months, if not a year or more. So with the viral infection or the vaccines, the spike protein stays within the body, and it's found in the heart, the brain, the vital organs, and it's causing problems. And we believe it's related to nervous system problems like small fiber neuropathy. And so because the body appears to have problems breaking down the spike protein and clearing it out, there's been a search for what could actually dissolve the spike protein. It does appear to have vulnerabilities in it, what's called proteolytic cleavage joints. And I give great credit to the Japanese, who early on discovered that an enzyme produced from the breakdown of soy, so Bacillus subtilis natto, is called nattokinase. It's an endogenous thrombolytic digestive enzyme, if you will. The Japanese have been using this for heart and vascular disease now for 20 years. It's safe. It is a form of a mild blood thinner, that it dissolves the spike protein nearly completely. Today on my Substack was an in vitro study showing that if the virus is trying to attack a cell, it actually can't do it if nattokinase there is dissolving the spike protein. Now, I want to be careful. I can't make therapeutic claims because human studies are not yet done. It'll probably take many years to get large prospective randomized trials that we need. Many people are saying, listen, it's a safe supplement now with the caveats we know. Let's give it a try in treating patients with long COVID or vaccine injury syndromes. And the anecdotes are coming in and they're very positive. It's slow to work, but they're very positive. My experience so far is about 2 months of supplementation. Patients seem to improve, whether that's spontaneous or attributed to that or other medicines, but it's all positive.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but natto, which is, as I understand it, a fermented kind of a cheese-like product that is consumed as part of the natural diet in Japan. It is a fermented product that has this enzyme within it, and that has other health benefits in addition to the fact that it's been found that it might break apart or break down these toxic spikes that are found on the outside of COVID, but it also breaks down and helps with blood clotting and helps with atherosclerotic disease, if I'm not mistaken.
It's true. There's 2 papers. They're mixed on progression of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. One shows benefit, one shows neutrality. Tends to lower blood pressure a little bit, lower cholesterol a little bit, and lower blood glucose. So it's safe. The caveats, again, are it's a blood thinner, so bleeding, mucosal nosebleeds or bleeding, easy bruising, bleeding while brushing teeth. The other caveat is soy allergy. If someone has a soy allergy, you want to be careful. It can recur. But it's been used now for 2 decades by the Japanese, and the discovery, and I think the most impressive studies by Tanakawa and colleagues, showing near complete dissolution of the spike protein in preclinical models, intact cells, and then in homogenized material. Wow, this is important because we do believe the spike protein, which is installed after vaccination and after the illness, is causing the problem.
And again, I think the important part is it's very similar to what happened when the virus was first out there. People like you and other real scientists, real physicians, people who are dedicated to their trade, were looking for solutions, not just saying, oh, live in fear, hide in your basement, bathe in Purell, wear a mask, and hope to heck that somebody hacks up a vaccine. And so likewise, here we are now after the pandemic, and you and others are saying, okay, we have a lot of people harmed and who are suffering. What are the things we can do? In other words, it's the opposite of that therapeutic nihilism that you have talked about from the beginning. And so I think that it is incumbent upon us to do an all hands on deck and say, okay, how are we going to help these people? And hopefully nattokinase and some of these types of supplements can get us there. Now I want to talk a little bit about, what you and Drew are saying at the beginning, this egregious amount of censorship and the cancel culture and the corruption that has gone on. I found it interesting that Anthony Fauci came out recently and acknowledged that, quote, mistakes were made, including his tacit acknowledgement that face masks don't work. He managed to do so while absolving himself of all responsibility for what happened. Where do you see things going with the leadership, public health leadership in this country?
Yeah, I think people have really lost their trust. I was struck by the release by Freedom of Information Act, the communication between Fauci and Francis Collins, head of the NIH, when the Great Barrington Declaration was proposed by Jay Bhattacharya at Stanford, Martin Kulldorff at Harvard, and Sunitra Gupta at Oxford, esteemed scientists. The Great Barrington Declaration was basically a proposal that we protect high-risk seniors, take special measures, and that the rest of society kind of move on and we'll work our way through the pandemic. What Fauci and Collins, the interchange was that there's a fringe epidemiologist who's put this forward. And can we do something in social media to crush him? Right. This is amazing. That degree, they should be asking him into the NIH and have a discussion. When I proposed early treatment, published it widely, published as best I could. I have now, I have over approaching 700 peer-reviewed publications in the National Library of Medicine, approaching 70 in COVID-19. One of the most published people you're ever going to have on the show or elsewhere. That means I've just looked at more data. I've spent more time in scholarship. People like myself, Jay Bhattacharya, that we should have been welcomed in to help guide the pandemic response instead of, being the target of the crushing reprisal.
Right. And not only getting kicked off of social media, but you, along with people like Dr. John Littell, who's a friend of this show, Meryl Nass, and others have been the targets for, losing your medical license or losing your board certification, being kicked off of, kicked out of staff, hospital staff meetings and so on. And this is the stuff really of the Cultural Revolution in China. What differentiates us from North Korea when these sorts of things are happening?
It's true. We've seen a wave of totalitarianism, authoritarian thinking. Remember, this is a novel pandemic. Now we have a novel wave of long COVID and vaccine injury syndrome. This is where we need all opinions out. We need everybody has a fair voice on this. Let the science guide us. I've been struck with professional attack by the American Board of Internal Medicine. I've had to get lawyers, and now my case is kind of stayed at the appeal level internally right now. But, I'm a top graduate of a top medical school. I trained in epidemiology at one of the best schools of public health. I trained at the #1 internal medicine program in the United States, most published person in my field in the world in history before COVID. Really? I'm going to have a board try to lay out a tag because I'm trying to help people through my clinical practice and my scholarship and my role as a public figure. And I was a public figure before COVID. So it's not like, I came out of nowhere. People knew me. I had chaired programs for the National Institutes of Health, Data Safety Monitoring Board, overall principal investigator of clinical trials. I'd lectured before the Congressional Oversight Panel in 2007 in the FDA, European Medicine Agency, New York Academy of Sciences. So I have a pristine academic track record. I still have it. And I think the American board knows it, and they've backed down. Now, I've never had any troubles with my state licensure, but I'm willing to take a very firm posture with them as well.
No, and it's
part of this,
horrific as
guys,
it's been.
if I could say, Kelly, if I could jump on a little bit here, that you know, it is, you know, Kelly, the stuff of Maoist policy during the Cultural Revolution, but strangely, it has been sort of carried out. Really, I just look back on this couple of years, instigated by the press, and certainly winds blown along by our public health officials and governors and things. But the press, when I was screaming against the, you know, settle down, everybody, the group I was yelling at was the press. I could see the panic porn they were attempting to induce. They had just been through all kinds of panic around President Trump, and this was just now a way to use that mechanism that they discovered to continue this incredible excess rather than actual reporting. But my question is, Peter has occasionally lately been talking about the fact that they seem to be they're staging for another one. It's as though any little virus, they tried to do it with monkeypox. Now it looks like they're getting ready to do it with Marburg virus. Is that true, or am I reading too much into this?
You know, we're hearing these types of alarming headlines. And the best example you mentioned was monkeypox. Monkeypox have been around for decades, sporadic zoonotic outbreaks. We had an outbreak in the United States in the 70s. And there, you know, believe it or not, the WHO declared a national monkeypox emergency. President Biden declared a national emergency. And, you know, I was studying this carefully. We had a case in Dallas a year earlier. He didn't spread it to anyone. He'd come from Africa. We realized it's a low spread. It was easily handled. We have a drug called tecovirimat. It's very effective. He was treated fine. So fortunately with monkeypox, we got out ahead of it. It adapted a human-to-human spread through sexual contact, largely male, either, you know, male-to-male sexual contact.
You weren't allowed to say that. You couldn't say that. You couldn't say that it was a particular risk group. For the first time in medical history, you weren't allowed to talk about how it's transmitted and who was at risk. You have to not say that. Not say that.
Drew, I was walking on eggs trying to do this, but it did change. And there was a very important paper by Thornhill in New England Journal of Medicine. So the point is, we got ahead of this in the media. I came out and said, listen, we can handle this. And, you know, it really just kind of died. It fell out of the media stream. January 31st, with no fanfare, no announcement, it just dropped as a national emergency.
So talk a little bit. So yeah, Marburg is where I was going next. So yes, we started hearing reports of isolated cases of Marburg, first in the UK and then elsewhere. You know, let's lay it out first for people who might not know what Marburg virus is, where it's normally found in sub-Saharan Africa, what the cases are like. You know, clearly it's far more lethal than any of these than monkeypox or COVID or anything else we're talking about. But start with, what is Marburg virus, and what do you think the actual risk is for it becoming a pandemic?
Right. So Marburg virus is a single-stranded RNA virus. It's related to Ebola. And, you know, there's been sporadic outbreaks for decades, just like monkeypox, for decades. Marburg, Germany is where it was named. And it largely is in pockets in Africa. It has very small and brief outbreaks. It's highly contagious. And in facilities like the backwoods of Africa, you know, where there's little ICU support or medicines, it can have a high mortality. I think a modern case of Marburg's today, you know, with good ICU support would probably be a very supportable illness. We had experience with a related illness, Ebola, in Dallas a few years ago. And so, you know, we were in the epicenter of it at, Presbyterian Hospital. But what we know here is that there are viruses out there that cause severe syndromes. Marburg is associated with is considered a hemorrhagic fever. So there's mucosal bleeding. And that's, you know, some of the images that people see. But the bottom line is, I think with good ICU support, it's manageable. It's not going to spread like SARS-CoV-2. It's already been studied for, 4 or 5 decades. It's not something now to bring up as an imminent threat.
And so I guess that's the question. And, you know, I read your Substack about it is, you know, why are they, you know, they ran monkeypox up the flagpole, that it failed to cause the amount of fear that they had hoped. although they really did try pretty desperately, as Drew said, to act as if everyone was at risk for this, to not allow you to talk about who the real risk groups were, and to certainly not talk about how it could very quickly be nipped in the bud. Why, now with Marburg, why do you think they are doing this? What do you think their end goal is?
I think overtly they probably say that this is in the spirit of pandemic readiness. We'll probably see some readiness discussions about other illnesses, Ebola, anthrax. We can anticipate some of these. Pandemic preparedness now is a hot topic. So there is an entire organization founded by the World Economic Forum and the Gates Foundation called CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. They have a lot of funding, and so they are doing a lot of preparatory planning exercises, training efforts. So people have said, listen, there's going to be another pandemic. I don't know if that's the case, but there's a lot of effort in preparing for that. And I think because of this, these media stories get legs underneath them.
I'm worried that group has become a liability. I really do. I don't even call them pandemic preparedness anymore. I call them Pandemic Inc. It's really just a bunch of hammers looking for a nail, and it really does not have much of the usual risk-reward decision-making that we as physicians have to make. I thought of something else that was interesting as it pertains to pandemic policy. I heard Michelle Obama being interviewed. This is maybe a year old, something like that, interview by Oprah. She was being interviewed, and she was talking about bringing her kids home from school during the darkest hours of the pandemic and how scared she was. And she said, fortunately, I was living with a former president. And that former president was president during a major pandemic. And she almost went so far as to say he told us to shut up, essentially, that this is not a lot different than what they tried to shut me down too, is sort of what she was kind of alluding to. Like during H1N1, Obama was recommended to shut the world down too, and he didn't. We need to hear from him. If that is true, if I'm not reading inaccurately between the lines of what Michelle Obama was alluding to, we need to hear from him, because he could be a major, major force for good in just balancing things, because he did make the decision not to shut the world down. I got H1N1. It was horrible. It was worse than COVID, but he didn't shut the world down because of it.
I think those are fair points. We're always going to have to ask the question, is something in the future big enough to try to make global decisions, shutting the entire world down, or should we take a more targeted approach? I mentioned the Great Barrington Declaration, which suggested protective measures for seniors, vaccines for seniors. It was just a targeted approach, and many think, looking back, that was far more rational. And so to shut down schools, it was just went too far. And what we're really talking about is the contagious aspect of fear. Fear spreads from person to person. It's a mental contagion.
Yeah, I think Dr. McCullough, you are more generous than I when giving people credit for the. Well, you give people credit for the idea that. No, he does. You give people credit for the idea that it was a novel virus and we didn't know, and I would submit that. The science didn't change, that we've known for decades that face masks do fundamentally nothing to stop the spread of respiratory viruses. We've known for decades that lockdowns are far more damaging than they do good. They penalize the entire population rather than the targeted group who are actually at risk. We knew from the beginning that children were at a de minimis risk from COVID, and there was never any rationale for shutting down schools, and on and on.
Kelly, I thought of you today. I'm going to interrupt you. I thought you today I was at my own urology visit, and in there was a big sign that said 6 feet saves lives, and I literally laughed out loud, and your face appeared to me. And I thought 6 feet saves lives. Really? What's the evidence?
No, not zero. But what I want to ask you, and we will perhaps all three of us disagree about this. Do you, at this point, Dr. McCullough, do you see any rationale, given the amount of data that you've looked at with regard to the COVID vaccines, bivalent or otherwise, newer, do you see any reason that these vaccines should still be on the market today, given the amount of data that we have about adverse events?
No, I do not. On December 7th, 2022, I called in the U.S. Senate for all of them to be removed off the market. I'm in line with the World Council for Health, which made that call based on their pharmacovigilance report. June 11th, 2022. So they should be off the market because of safety reasons.
And I think that's something that we really need to talk about. This isn't sort of for some risk groups. The reality is that the COVID, the variants right now are very, very mild. They cause something akin to a cold. Most people can be treated very easily with over-the-counter medications. People aren't even going to their doctors for the current symptomatology, let alone being admitted to the hospital or dying. That is the reality. And the number of severe adverse events, really, as I said, I think the data are unassailable. That these vaccines have caused untold harm. And I think that, really I am with you in believing that we need to call for a complete and total recall from the market. Do you think that is likely to happen?
No, I don't think so, because the vaccines are considered countermeasures. That's a military term. And anytime we have a national security emergency, which is the COVID-19, and there's countermeasures, it's like a military term. It means that whatever military decision, it doesn't mean how many collateral injuries are, it's not going to be removed from the market. But you see all kinds of signs that the government agencies really, are not behind them. This week, Biden administration dropped all the mandates for the remainder of the government workers, even incoming people to the country. You can see this sweeping across the globe, that people are dropping the vaccines, but they won't be dropped because under the PrEP Act, these are considered countermeasures. They're going to be continued to be available out there in the world. The only way they're going to stop is if people stop taking them altogether. And we're approaching that right now. We know the COVID Community States Project weighed in, by the way, huge sample, 25,000 people, Northeastern and Harvard. Only 25% of Americans took 75% of Americans took a vaccine, 25% didn't. 25% unvaccinated. That's a big number. The CDC said 8%. And what the investigators found is the CDC was overcounting people who lost their vaccine cards. They were just given another vaccine card and counting them again. So now 25% of Americans never took a vaccine. I didn't take one. Best decision I ever made.
Yeah, I'm asked frequently what the numbers are. I know that the CDC said 92% of Americans are vaccinated. I think people have good reason to be dishonest in both directions. There are many people, certainly, who said that they got vaccinated when they didn't. There are lots of fake vaccine cards out there. That's the reality. People who wanted to travel or go to restaurants or whatever it was and didn't want to get vaccinated. So there are many people who said they were vaccinated when they weren't. And then likewise, I suspect there are many people who got vaccinated who now feel that they made a bad decision. They feel that they were duped and they don't want to acknowledge that they made this. So they're saying, oh no, I never took one. So I wonder if we will ever really get a good handle on how many folks are vaccinated. But you believe that that a more realistic number would be somewhere around 25% of Americans are not vaccinated?
Right. The COVID Community States Program, you can find it online. Again, Northeastern University and Harvard, 25% of adults unvaccinated. It's interesting because, the 25% who say they didn't take a vaccine like me did so for very specific reasons. Many of us suffered, professional or family or social reprisal because of this. We're likely to be voters in the upcoming sets of elections, and only 60% of Americans vote. So nearly half of the voting adult population did not take a vaccine. It's so interesting because the candidates will have to figure out what their stance is on the vaccines.
Well, I am encouraged to think that number is 25%. I am not vaccinated for COVID. Interestingly, and I've told this story before on air, I have two allergies, and one of them is a very severe allergy to polyethylene glycol. And I was hospitalized twice during the pandemic for an orthopedic injury and had to have surgery. And I cannot tell you, my chart had emblazoned on the front how they do with allergies, big red letters, allergy, polyethylene glycol. I probably had 50 healthcare professionals during those hospitalizations come in and try to convince me that I needed to be vaccinated. And their response when I said, have you seen my allergy to polyethylene glycol? One of the key ingredients in these vaccines? And their answer was, Well, if you have anaphylaxis, you're here in the hospital. So we can take care of you. We'll be able to treat you. Can you imagine if you, as a doctor, gave penicillin knowingly to somebody who had penicillin allergy emblazoned on the front of their chart? I mean, we have lost our collective minds if we're at that point.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Polyethylene glycol severe allergies are important. Remember the consent form in the FAQ for the vaccine say if you have a severe allergy to any component of the vaccine, you shouldn't take it. So even the official government materials say you shouldn't take it. Remember sports football superstar Aaron Rodgers had a very severe polyethylene glycol allergy, and that was the reason why he didn't take the vaccine. Mm-hmm. He got sick with COVID. He got the McCullough protocol. I had just gone on with Joe Rogan. He got through it. So did Joe. Kind of the innovations that we all put together in early treatment worked, and they don't need a vaccine. So I'm really glad Aaron didn't take the vaccine, because we could have lost our one of our favorite quarterbacks. He's now on the Jets. So New York has them. But, people have to make smart decisions. You made a smart decision. Some of the deaths that have happened right in the vaccine center were probably fatal anaphylactoid reactions that couldn't be resuscitated.
Yeah.
Dr. McCullough, really quick, couple quick things from my camp, really quick. People are chatting away on a restream, and they wanted a little clarification on your vaccine. I have two questions. The one is clarification on your vaccine history. Did you not take any vaccine because somebody said they thought you had taken an initial shot but no boosters?
No, I never took the COVID-19 vaccine. Prior to COVID, I had taken all the vaccines in the CDC ACIP schedule, including the doctor vaccines, and I took more vaccines when I went to India a few years ago. So I readily accept vaccines. I don't personally have any problem with the vaccines. But when COVID came, Dr. Drew, I had already had COVID early, and I just recovered from it. And when they rolled out, I said, "Listen, I just went through it. I'm not comfortable with this. I didn't take the vaccine."
That's why I laugh about when people call me anti-vax. I'm saying I'm one of the most heavily vaccinated people you know. I've been vaccinated for more things than most people because of areas of the world I've chosen to travel. But like you, I said this one's not for me. So, speaking of NFL players, you were relatively outspoken, as was I, about Damar Hamlin. Clearly, Damar Hamlin has the narrative now is that we're supposed to believe that his cardiac arrest was a result of commotio cordis. I saw the play, and I assume you have seen it many, many times, and I don't find it a plausible explanation in any way, shape, or form. And I hope for his sake that he has an implanted defibrillator, because I think that the risk of his having a repeat event is high. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I was on Tucker Carlson within 24 hours of the arrest, and I was the only public figure doctor that told Tucker in the world he was going to survive. I told Random Fox News, he'll walk out of the hospital, he'll survive. He had very good resuscitation. I watched it carefully, but he had a primary cardiac arrest on the field. And, the number one cause of that in an athlete who's been screened for other causes of sudden death is actually COVID-19 vaccine-induced myocarditis. The guidelines with myocarditis say if an athlete has it, they can't go on the sports field because a surge of adrenaline will precipitate a cardiac arrest. The NFL said that 95% of the players took the vaccine. So the number one in the differential was COVID-19 vaccine-induced myocarditis. Commotio cordis, which is a blow to the chest, typically by a baseball to an unprotected sternum, that was ruled out because that causes immediate ventricular fibrillation. So if a baseball hits the chest, the player goes down instantaneously. What had happened is he had tackled the player, got up, clapped his hands, and then he went down. Commotio cordis has never happened in the NFL or football because the pads protect the breastbone and the helmet is too diffuse. And so a tackle to the chest doesn't create the same force as a 100 mile an hour.
Rarely in adults, usually pre-adolescent males. That's the thin chest wall is sort of a necessity for that. I would offer one other theory, which is pulmonary embolus, because he rearrested once they got him off the field, and pulmonary embolus is really common for people to rearrest, and his neurologic status improved days before his pulmonary status, which is another pulmonary embolus sort of thing.
Well, Dr. Drew, here's another interpretation. watch carefully, he actually, they had to turn his head. So when he arrested, he actually must have just drank some Gatorade. I think he actually aspirated is what happened. Because
well, that's the other possibility. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Because he's right.
That's the other reason his lungs may have lingered. Yes, or
right.
shock lung. Those are the other two possibilities. Right. Yeah.
But here's the situation. His relative that said he rearrested, later on he recanted that and said he was just the layperson misinterpreted what's going on in the ICU.
Okay.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
If he had pulmonary embolism, he would be on anticoagulants. He can't return to football. Right. Okay, so that's out. Right. And if he had a primary cardiac arrest due to vaccine-induced myocarditis, an ICD implanted, and he can't return to football. He could do some other activities. So believe it or not, he's going to be the first player in history, according to what's been publicly stated, to have commotio cordis playing pro football, have a primary arrest on the field, and return with no ICD. So he's setting all records. Yeah. And as a cardiologist, I care for patients like this. I'm concerned he's at risk for a repeat arrest.
One more quick one, which would be he could have do 6 months of anticoagulants and then go back to playing. It's been 3 or 4 months now already. He could be on the tail end of his anticoagulation course and return. Also, I want you to talk a little about Jamie Foxx and what's going on there. I hear he did an interview today. I'm delighted to hear that he seems at least cognitively intact. But this sounds like a terrible thing. He's been in the hospital for weeks. You don't do that for nothing.
It's true. He must have had a significant stroke or complications. And, I know Jamie, he took pictures with me. We had a private conversation about, COVID, the risks and what have you. So he's going to have his own way to communicate a personal health crisis with the public. He's a great guy. I really respect him. Terrific actor. We wish him the best. But, stroke in a young person, again, raises concerns because the vaccines are associated with stroke. There's a paper in JAMA by Von Dag-Berhild. You're going to be blown away with this. They described 7,750 strokes or intracranial hemorrhages within 28 days of the vaccine. It was published in JAMA. It is an unbelievable signal. So the first thing you see when a young person in stroke, again, you think of COVID-19 vaccination.
Yeah, and we are seeing an unprecedented number of young people with sudden deaths and with inexplicable cases of turbo cancers, people dying within days or weeks of being diagnosed with the first cancer, resurgence of cancers that had been previously deemed to be in remission, and all kinds of things that really, they have not been explained. And the reality is that HHS and the CDC own the data in VAERS. It is their system, yet they have really been remiss in analyzing the data on their own. I don't see that it's going to happen unless it continues to happen through the private sector and through people like you and Ed Dowd and other people, Naomi Wolf, who are really diving into it. But I don't think there's any other way to parse the data or to understand the data than that these are clearly related to the vaccines.
We need to merge the all-cause mortality data and the National Death Index and the vaccine administration data. The CDC holds the data. They can merge it. And if there's no temporal correlation, there won't be any. But indeed, if people are dying in large numbers within 30 days of the vaccine, that's a reasonable regulatory window of concern. That would support, again, this global call to get these off the market before more people die.
In your clinical practice, are you continuing to see cardiac-related issues related to the vaccine that you had, for example, say a year ago?
Yeah, we're seeing the cases all day long. In fact, I'm at American First News Network. We're shooting the second opinion, and we have with us a young gal who's a terrific CrossFit athlete, a pilot, suffered myopericarditis with one shot of Moderna. It's ruined her. She still isn't back. It's been about 18 months. She's, seen 3 or 4 doctors, went to the Mayo Clinic, MRI, confirmed vaccine-induced myocarditis. I saw her today in the office. We're going to go on TV here in a few minutes. But this is every day now. Large blood clots that are not resolving with blood thinners. I'm very worried about this. The largest blood clots I've seen clinically. FDA has published on this, a paper by Wu and colleagues, publishing blood clots in about 3,900 patients going from the ankle to the hip. About 11% were fatal. These are all in the peer-reviewed published literature, greatly concerned about the cardiovascular, neurologic, thromboembolic and immunologic complications of the vaccines.
You mentioned that this woman you're talking about is not only an athlete but a pilot. There are huge safety concerns, I think, with regard to the health, the overall health and fitness of people like pilots or bus drivers. I've heard multiple reports of school buses, crashing when the school bus driver became unconscious. We know that it's happening in the commercial airline industry with pilots. Are you seeing any new recommendations for, what should we be doing with pilots before we allow them to fly, or school bus drivers?
There's a paper in JAMA in 2020 by Daniels and colleagues. With COVID, there was such a concern with COVID before the vaccines that it would cause myocarditis. There was an official Big Ten screening program where they had a tiered strategy of blood biomarkers, EKG, echo, and MRI, and they adequately tested. They didn't find much with COVID, since COVID yields such few cases of clinical myocarditis, no hospitalizations and deaths in the athletes. But that program, which they jettisoned after COVID, they should have actually had that for the athletes. And I think for the pilots, they ought to go through some formalized screening program. Again, blood test, EKG, cardiac imaging, all based on clinical judgment. We hope the majority of them are fine, but there's a great concern. I've been impressed by a paper by Schmeling and colleagues from from Denmark. This is striking. Of everybody who took the vaccine and they knew who had the complications, a third of people had zero complications, none. 2/3 of people have some moderate, low-level complications, like arm swelling, fever, etc. And 4.2% have catastrophic things happen to them. That's in the paper by Schmeling from Denmark. So some people must have gotten bad lots. It's 4.2% of these vials, which either have an excess amount of messenger RNA or contaminants or something. Is probably related to specific vials and doesn't apply to everybody taking the vaccine.
Yeah, we reported on that. I've reported on that from the beginning. Very clearly, there is a disproportionate number of adverse events that occur with a relatively small number of the lots. I mean, early on, they had that website, how bad is my batch? And it clearly indicated some either inconsistency or lack of quality control in the manufacturing process itself, or something worse. But I think you're right. I think there's clearly some element that some lots had either more mRNA, or because of the multi-use vials, that the people who are giving these injections, you have a multi-use vial, say, that holds 50 doses in it, and you're getting these things in the parking lot at the local Walmart. And you've got people giving the shots during the heat of the vaccination program. A lot of the people giving the shots were not, physicians or trained in giving injections. They were literally, it was mass, these mass inoculation centers. And so I suspect that there was a lack of quality that resulted in, unfortunately, a disproportionate number of cases happening from a small number of lots. That's my take on it.
Just to clarify, I think it's 6 doses per vial, but the multi-use, remember they use single-use vials in the randomized trials. Multi-use vials and injecting air and leaving them out would actually degrade the messenger RNA. So some people, because of that phenomenon, probably ended up with few side effects. But the ones that had very good product transport and so they could have been.
If you remember, when we talked to Sasha Latipova, she had evidence that there were some serious manufacturing shortcomings that would lead to exactly what you guys are talking about.
Yeah, and the lipid nanoparticles are its own, there are deleterious or negative side effects from the lipid nanoparticles themselves, independent of the mRNA and independent of production of spike proteins. So there are just an awful lot of components of these vaccines, I think, that could be causing some of these adverse events. But I am with Dr. McCullough in believing that there is absolutely no rationale and no scientific justification for allowing these things to remain on the market at this point. In the last few minutes here, Dr. McCullough, you've been so nice to give us another hour of your time. What else would you, what have we not covered today that you think is important for us to hear about?
I think the big vistas now are going to be, I think very few people will take any more vaccines. Even Dr. Drew is, showing equipoise at this point in time, and, which is fine. Everybody had their own view on. I had equipoise initially, but, I'm more hawkish on safety. I think very few people would be taking any more vaccines. We need to shift our attention towards long COVID, which is a real syndrome, and vaccine injury, and actually the two together, since most people actually have both. Research funding, I'm very excited about now 3 papers, 1 high quality trial. Hyperbaric oxygen appears to be really working in these syndromes. Well, this is wonderful. We've covered nattokinase. We don't know if the other peptidases work, seropeptidase and lumbicase. The blood clotting syndromes, my experience is they need intensive anticoagulation. Unfortunately, they're not going away in 3 or 6 months. In my experience, I have some patients now well over a year, no resolution of the thrombi induced by the vaccine. And we need constant vigilance here. The thing that's really getting people worried is how long do these vaccines pose a risk of sudden death? Today, we heard about Tori Bowie, who won an Olympic gold medal in 2016. And now 7 years later, she's had sudden death. I'm going to have to leave it here. I have to get going to the next shoot. But thank you so much for having me on the show. Be sure to follow me across social media. Go to my website, petermcculloughmd.com. So great to be back on Dr. Drew. And this will not be taken down from YouTube.
Dr.
Thank
McCullough,
you
appreciate your time.
Amen.
Thank
Take
you
care of
as
yourself.
always.
We'll see you soon. So, as interesting, Kelly. I mean, he's as always full of very. And I feel like his point of view has softened a little bit. Am I accurate on that? I know he's gotten clearer. I know he's now very much clearer that he would like the vaccines taken down. But has he softened his position, or is that just my perception?
I think he's always so measured, and it's one of the things that makes him really wonderful. He's very measured about things. He always cites the data. He always cites the studies. He has a great command of the most recent research, and he is will acknowledge. And I think importantly, Drew, and maybe what you're picking up on is that he always is willing to acknowledge that the vaccines aren't the only problem, and that long COVID is in fact a real entity, and that the virus itself causes a problem for a lot of people. So I think that's really, he's not just sort of it's all vaccines and that's the only problem. He's willing to acknowledge really the importance of, and so I think that's what you're picking up on. But he's a great guest, and we need to keep having him back regularly because he's always up on the latest.
I agree. My commitment got pushed back a few minutes. Do you want to take a couple calls real quick just to see what people are thinking?
Sure.
Okay, let's do that. Susan, are you cool with that?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Oh, yeah, you're fine. Okay, good. Howard to Charm, this is coming up. I see your guys' hands up. I see you all. We'll get you up there in just a second. And you have to, once I call you up, you'll be out on multiple streaming platforms. Don't forget, and you have to unmute yourself, the mic in the lower left-hand corner, right after we get you hooked up. There you are. Okay, so unfortunately, because we have limited time, I can't wait while people get things set up. So that's Mr. Love next. Mr. Love, will give you a chance to come on up here. I know your hand is up. I see you. There you are. Unmute yourself, Mr. Love, so we can hear you. There you are.
Oh, hey, Dr. Drew. I just heard Dr. Peter McCullough. Thank you guys for bringing me up on the platform. But Dr. Drew and Caleb, I know I was brought up last week. I'd actually like to recuse myself and actually bring up answers for Sean, if you would. I think he's got a very telling story to tell.
Well, he has. I'll bring him up again. He has been up here before. He has a son that had a horrible, really, just an unbelievable story of vaccine reaction. And of course, like many family members and patients with vaccine reactions, they're marginalized. So I will bring him. Thank you. Okay. Hold on, Mr. Love. We'll get him up here.
Yep.
Answers for Sean. There you are. Okay. All right. Have you heard this story, Kelly? It's an awful story. It's just heartbreaking.
I don't know. I hear an awful lot of horrific vaccine stories.
I know. You're on, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Drew, and hello, Kelly. My 17-year-old son, who played hockey his whole life, died 33 days after his very first Pfizer vaccine. The cause of death was unascertained. Dr. Cole now has my son's tissue samples, thank God. And it's impossible for anyone in Canada to ever get the truth because not one pathologist here is staining slides for spike.
Right.
I had to go to America to get help. And I get made fun of so much saying I'm lying. And, well, how can I ever prove the truth in Canada if no one can do it? And I don't even understand why they're not doing it when Dr. Cole has offered to teach whoever wants to know.
Yeah. Right.
Thank God my son's slides are with Dr. Cole.
What is your first name again? I'm sorry. I know Sean is your son.
It's Dan.
Dan. Hey, Kelly, answer me this. Is Dr. Cole going to publish his stuff? That's the one pushback I keep getting on his material. Is he got a plan to put it together in some way and publish it somewhere?
Well, I think he's trying to. He's trying to help as many people as he can, and he's offered to teach the pathologists, as Dan pointed out. Yes, we have the stains. They are readily available to be able to differentiate between spike proteins that are issued as a result of the virus versus spike proteins that are in the tissues as a result of the vaccine. They stain differently. So it is critically important to be able to do those stains because you can prove, for example, this is vaccine-induced myocarditis or vaccine-induced nephritis versus that these are tissue injuries caused by having had the virus itself. So I agree with Dan. Unless you do those stains, and they're not difficult, any pathologist can do them. They just need to do the appropriate tissue sampling and use the appropriate stains. Why they don't want to is beyond me. I don't know what kind of pressure they're getting. I know the kinds of pressure that Dr. McCullough and I got to not say the things we were saying on the open airwaves. So I don't know if the same thing is happening in the pathology, within their own circles. But I'm happy to hear that at least Sean's tissues are being evaluated, and hopefully you will get an answer to this heart-wrenching question.
And Dan, why don't you let people know where they can go to read more, and hopefully you'll update them on these materials as they become available.
Oh, you can come to my Twitter site, and I'll be posting as soon as I hear something from Dr. Cole. I'll let the world know. And I think it's very important to announce to the world the truth.
Answers number 4, Sean, and Sean is spelled S-E-A-N. So answers number 4, Sean, S-E-A-N. All right, Dan. I always, we get very upset. Your story is just heartbreaking. When you first told it, Susan didn't recover for about a week. And, I think you should have some answers. And
still not recovered.
Yeah, I know.
Well, you never get over that.
I know. All right, Dan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Drew. Thank you.
Yeah, that story. I'm glad you were here for that, Kelly, if you hadn't heard that before, because we've talked to him a couple of times, and each time it's like, it just brings it home.
Right.
All right. This is kind of interesting. Oh, here's somebody who is herself or himself injured, so-called red pill.
I was just telling Emily I wanted to book some people who have had vaccine.
Well, I've got somebody I want Yogendra to interview, to actually do an evaluation on the show. So, and I cleared it with him today. So, red pill.
Hey, Dr. Drew, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
Good. We spoke probably about a year ago. I've been dealing with a pretty serious vaccine injury for about 2 years now. Neurological issues, neuropathies, POTS, so on and so forth. Quick question for you, though. So one thing that's very interesting is that, like, my symptoms wax and wane pretty heavily. And what I've noticed is that, like, let's say I'm intimate with my wife, right? The day after, the head pressure, the neuropathy, all that stuff kind of alleviates. And then day 2, day 3, everything comes roaring back. So I feel like it's some kind of, hormone imbalance or
here's my
something's
guess.
going on.
Here's my guess. because I talked to Dr. Yogendra today about what they're finding, and it's very clear. It's vascular. It's just like Dr. Cole told us, vascular endothelial inflammation. And so it is that's really where the problems, although it's in other tissues and things, the main syndrome appears to be related to endothelial inflammation. Other things happen as a result. These non-classical monocytes get into the CSF, and there's VEGF increase, and inflammatory cytokine markers go up. All this stuff is all sort of probably epiphenomenon. But again, I'm going to get him in here soon to give us an update. But it makes sense to me in the sense that sexual activity causes vasodilatation, lots of it. That's why people sneeze and get runny noses and things from things like Viagra, because that nitric oxide activation causes dilation. And I bet that it takes you probably get some relief from that. And then it suggests, would something like a nitric oxide inhibitor, a Viagra or something, help you feel better? I would talk to your doctors about that. Or would a vasodilator like an amlodipine or something like that? Again, because we don't know what we're doing here with these syndromes yet. These are all interesting ideas to kind of talk about. Am I right, Kelly? Did I hear somebody at some point saying something about Viagra as a possible therapeutic? Makes kind of sense.
Because I think that when you're talking about treating the vascular side effects, then yes, something like any vasodilators, which would certainly include something like amlodipine, as you said, or Viagra, and many others. But again, these are things that we just are going to have to try using some stuff, quote, off-label. The dreaded off-label. What we've always done in medicine.
Oh God, how dare you? How dare you? Try to help your patient. My God.
Same way we came to steroids and hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, because using things off label is a mainstay. It's been a cornerstone of medicine. And so I think that getting to the adequate treatment of people with long COVID or with vaccine injuries is going to rely upon us to repurpose drugs based on the symptomatology and to be creative.
Yep, I totally agree. And again, Dr. Yogendra will tell us about some of the things they've been doing, and they've got all kinds of interesting ideas. So, Kelly, thank you, as always. I appreciate you very much, and thank you for helping us get Dr. McCullough in here. And next up for you and I is with Ed Dowd. I guess he's got some sort of interesting update for us.
He always does. I'll tell you,
sounded pretty excited.
He is unbelievable in terms of, he just keeps gathering more and more data and analyzes it in different ways and has a really great way of presenting it, I think, accessible to people who aren't necessarily scientific with regard to their backgrounds. So, yes, he's joining us on Monday the 8th at our usual time, 3 p.m. Pacific time on Monday.
And then tomorrow I'm going to talk to our friend Bobby Chacon. He's an FBI agent. Talk a little bit about what's going on at the FBI. Nikolai Petrovsky, May 9th. That should be interesting. You're with that too, aren't you?
I am.
He is. Tell me about Nikolai. Do you know? I don't know his story. I've seen his name around.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know much about him. No, I don't know a lot about him.
I may have referred him. Occasionally I will come upon people like, "Ooh, we got to talk to these guys." So I never remember their
I
names,
said, I'm all in.
Yeah. So apologies that I don't recall this, but I find them on social media or somewhere. I think this is really interesting. We should thump on them and see what's up. Also, Nicole Sapphire is coming in a couple of weeks as well. Is that correct, Susan?
We're trying to move her to the 15th.
Fair enough. Okay, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Sorry about I hung up on Twitter Spaces by accident. It really was. I don't even know how I did it.
Good job.
But it hung up. And so thank all of you over on Restream and of course at Rumble. We see the rants, and we'll see you tomorrow at 3:00.
Ta-ta.
Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help. The last memory I have, both of them, is greeting me in such a way. I'm like, no, you're Dave Chappelle. I'm like,
Right.
no, I'm the one.
Say, oh my God, Dr. Drew, I love it.
Exactly what he did.
It's like, oh, Dr. Drew, man, I did your show years ago, man. Years ago, man. It was such a great experience. And now it's called Dr. Drew After Dark. You know, when I see Dr. Drew After Dark, like a doctor after dark, man, you could have like nurses with thigh highs in here, just parading around, just say, hi, doctor, the doctor's in. It's time for Dr. Drew. Oh,